This is a watercolor painting, starting with the drawing. My reference, you'll see in a second here, is a statue at the Dixon Gardens in Memphis, Tennessee. I start with a skeleton drawing, getting the angles and the proportions, very carefully drawing the angles and proportions of the figure, checking and rechecking. I have a kneaded eraser in my left hand. Now that I've finished the skeleton part of it and gotten that mostly right, I think I can start to fill in the forms and the shapes of the body, the face. One thing I made a mistake on was getting her top of her head too close to the top edge of my 5 by 7 inch format. I'll fix that later. Right now I'm doing the right arm, and you'll see later that I got that a little bit too big, and I'm going to fix it. You'll see me fix it later. Initial early stages of the drawing are the most important, so it's good to take your time. Really pay attention and flick your eyes back and forth between the reference and your drawing very frequently. Don't just stare down at your drawing. Be looking at the reference continually as you're drawing, checking and checking. If you flick your eyes right now between my drawing and the reference, you'll see that her right arm is too big. And you'll see me use my eraser and fix that in a minute. I was struck by the beauty of this figure, the curves, the smooth. It's almost like a poem. The pose of the figure, very smooth and flowing and beautiful. Here I'm fixing that arm. I looked up the statue, and I looked up trying to find if there's a name for the statue, and I said, girl statue with holding wheat. And turns out it's most likely the Roman goddess Ceres, C-E-R-E-S. The Roman goddess of agriculture. And she's holding a bunch of wheat in her hand there, or some kind of grain, which will become more clear as I finish the drawing. I also messed with the levels in Adobe Premiere to get, that's why my hands were so dark there, to get so you could see the pencil drawing. Now I've taken the drawing, I finished the drawing and placed it on my drawing table. I did have it on my lap in front of the computer looking at the photograph, and now I've put it on the drawing table and I'm adding water to the figure, so I'm going to float in some color into the wet statue. It's good to add, accentuate or exaggerate some of the colors that you see to add more interest and realism to the drawing. Now I'm going to take a drier brush and wipe away some of the highlights where the light is hitting more directly. Now it's time to start to sculpt the sculpture by adding the shadows. This adds definition to the form. Watercolor dries lighter than it goes down. It goes down looking dark, and then when it dries, it's quite a bit lighter. I've been working with watercolor for many years and never quite got used to that. Never quite can predict exactly how much lighter it's going to be, so I usually have to go over things more than once to get the darkness that I want. Putting down hard-edged shadows, then I soften the edges with some clear water. It's a technique in watercolor that comes with experience, is knowing is the amount of water in the brush, the amount of pigment versus water. It's continually being adjusted according to the need, the need of the moment, as to how much water to put in the brush and how much pigment or paint to put in the brush to get the effect that you want. You'll see in just a minute, I'm going to turn the brush sideways. I'm going to get some paint in the brush, and then I'm going to turn the brush sideways and just drag across the figure to get texture. The paper I'm using is 140-pound Arches handmade watercolor paper, and it's got it's cold press. It's got a tooth to it, irregularities on the surface that really help when you're getting texture. So I'm going to drag the brush across the figure and get some of that concrete looking, I don't know what the statue's made of, but it has a rough texture, and I'm going to try to get some of that texture by using the side of my brush. Adding the texture to the handful of wheat she's carrying. Darkening the shadows again. Now there I go with the texture using the side of my brush. Got a little bit of a thunderstorm outside. Time to start the background. Quickly fill in the green color. Everything's green out there behind her. Start with a basic wash of a mid green, mid value green. I forgot to mention that this video has been sped up by 600%, and the whole thing still comes out to be about 20 minutes long, which indicates that the painting itself took about 2 hours. So I output the video, and now I'm going back and adding this audio narration as I watch it with you. There were large leaf bushes near the bottom of this in the reference I had, and I stylized them to some degree, and now I'm going back and painting the darks around the leaves to bring out the leaves themselves. common technique in watercolor. With pure watercolor, you cannot add opaque color, but of course I break that rule all the time using gouache. It's kind of tedious doing things like this, but it's put on a YouTube video of some audio or some audio book or something that I like to listen to, and it makes for a pleasant experience overall. Sorry, I cut off the bottom of this with my unprofessional video techniques. There's a whole bunch of leaves down there that you can't see. Finally remember to put the background through that hole in her arm, between her arm and her body. You see the blotchiness of the initial green wash there. That doesn't bother me a bit because I know I'm coming back with all kinds of textures for the leaves in the background. So that just helps with the variable tones of the background will actually help me in the end. Because I got her top of her head so close to the top of my format, I'm going to lift that tape. Later I'll lift the tape up and pull it up a little bit to give her more headroom and fill in with more green. It's just a design principle that you don't want your focal point, anything that's, you don't want people focusing on an area of the drawing or painting where things are just so close to the edge that it just bothers you. Plus, if anybody buys this painting and they come back with a frame or a mat, they're going to cut off some of that space even more. So the top of her head would be just touching the top of a mat or a frame. You don't want that to happen. In design principles, that's what's called an unfortunate tangent. It's disturbing. I'm getting it all wet so I can come back with some sepia. This is a sepia pigment that for my darks. And of course it's going to dry lighter. So what I'm going to be doing for the remainder of this painting is putting in the leaves and adding texture to simulate leaves. I'm going to use well, you'll see it in a minute and I'll talk about it, but I'm going to use a kind of a shorthand technique to simulate the texture of leaves without drawing every single tiny leaf. There I'm adding some texture with a paper towel. That will help me to simulate leaves. Now I think maybe it's dry. Yeah, it is dried, so I'm going to draw some more pencil leaves in strategic locations, but not all over. I'm not going to do these kinds of leaves all over and painstakingly paint around every leaf, although I am doing that at this moment. But that's strategically located. If you put enough leaves that are recognizable, then the human eye and the human brain working together will fill in the rest. So you say, oh, your brain will say, oh, there's a leafy background. and it will do it's kind of a trick you're playing on the viewing audience. You don't have to paint every single leaf. You just give them enough leaves to fool the brain into thinking, knowing, oh, there's leaves all over the place. And actually, that's what actually happens when we're out outside looking at a forest or any field of leaves and trees. We're not looking at every single leaf. Our brain is filling in for us. We're not noticing every leaf. So I'm simply doing what nature does in simulating a field or a bunch of leaves. So you can see the tip of my brush start to kind of dance around, not really painting leaves. I am and I'm not at the same time. I'm making random motions with my brush, keeping my wrist kind of supple and dancing around with the color. And it may or may not be the best bunch of leaves you've ever seen, but I think it did the job okay. I'm starting with a dark green, and then I'll come back with patches of the dark sepia to give it variety and hopefully be a convincing field of leaves. Of course, the first thing people will focus on, of course, will be the statue, the woman's face, and her pose, and the gracefulness of it. And the background is an essential player in the drama, but it is secondary. So you don't want to draw too much attention to it. Just like in a movie or a play, you don't want the secondary players stealing the show. So here I am adding some more darks to give the shadowed areas of the foliage more a convincing look. I think we're getting close to the end here. And there we have it. Thank you all for watching.